We're approaching the finale of the Book of Boba Fett, and while the statute of limitations on this last episode seems to basically be up, there will be spoilers for various elements in this video. Episode 6 saw various cameos or character introductions to the series, and one in particular has sparked massive debate in the Star Wars community, focusing on his appearance for his live-action debut, Cad Bane. As a character first introduced in animation, there's been some complaints over his appearance in this episode, and today I want to try to address those and give some of what I think are reasonably grounded opinions on why he looks how he does. With the many complaints also going around about the narrative path of the show in the last few episodes, I do think for those familiar with Cad's prior storyline intersecting with Boba's from the Clone Wars, that this is actually one of the connecting threads that has managed to escape most of the criticism there. I personally think he's a really fitting addition to Boba's story here, so let's talk about the visuals. Most complaints over Bane's appearance come from direct comparison with the Clone Wars, with some also coming from the original trilogy, which we'll get to in a minute. Compared to the Clone Wars, he is a different shade of blue and his face is a bit more squished vertically than in the animated version as well. YouTube channel Cinematic Captures did an edit of the appearance in order to bring him more in line with the Clone Wars appearance, and while the express statement of the creators there was that it was intended as just a what-if rather than trying to frame it as a fix, the resulting debate has been quite disappointing to say the least. They were just trying to do something they thought was cool, and which I think is cool as well, and the over-the-top fallout was definitely not their intention. For the shade of his skin color, what I think is the most reasonable explanation is that he's about 30 years older, and as Eckhart's Ladder mentioned in his own video on the topic, Tatooine has not proven to be the best skincare destination in the galaxy in the past. What I think is probably the more interesting point of discussion, because I think it actually gets to a different but pretty important takeaway on something Boba Fett has actually done really well, is the facial structure. Now, as many people have pointed out, the idea that the difference is solely because of changing mediums from cartoon to live action doesn't entirely hold up, considering we've seen Duros in live action as early as episode 4, and they do have a somewhat different facial structure than Cad Bane does here, though actually somewhat different from the Clone Wars version as well, and both seem to have more elongated faces. But the crucial element, in my opinion, that this misses out on is that those Duros do not need to talk. Star Wars is chock full of background aliens in live action, and some of those costumes or fully CGI aliens do look quite good, or even better in a vacuum than some of what we've seen in Book of Boba Fett. But the difference is, to be regularly featured or featured in a prominent way, they need to be reasonably able to talk about as easily as a human character would be able to be made to talk. The closer an alien's facial structure is to a human, which is ultimately what the difference in Cad Bane's design here is, the more reasonable it is that a person in a costume or motion capture suit can regularly and reliably fill that role without it being substantially more expensive. With the crime bosses and Trandoshans, etc. in Book of Boba Fett, we may have had some instances of aliens not looking quite as good as in, say, Episode 5, but ultimately, aside from what's reasonable to expect from a movie versus a show, these changes are, in my opinion, what have allowed us to have bigger roles for a wider variety of aliens in Book of Boba Fett, compared to pretty much any live-action series or movie we've had so far. If you look at aliens which have a speaking role in other shows, usually what you end up with are droids who don't need to look natural, supporting a wide array of humans with the occasional Wookiee, who are also pretty much entirely doable via costume. Or you have species like Mon Calamari, which are different and limited enough that their speech being limited to just a few jaw waves gets the job done. Or you have other characters like Jabba who are in a few scenes and do speak, but they're not the kind of thing that you'd be able to see quite as regularly in live action as in animation. It is of course not impossible to have heavier CG use on characters to distort away from human faces, but that brings up production costs. You can see it a fair bit more in movies, but even then it's usually characters that look more human getting more of the screen time. As Cinematic Captures themselves point out, while their take on Cad Bane does look quite good, there are still some distortions you can see from the effects, and it is more expensive to do an alien as a series regular compared to a human this way. The bigger that disparity is, the more likely we are to just keep aliens as a background novelty. I personally think some of the trade-offs there are more than worth it. The counter-argument, I suppose, would be that Disney is rich, so anything that is possible should probably be feasible to do for the show. But I think the development of tech like what we've seen so far for Luke or for the Volume, which is basically the virtual stage they have set up for Mando and have developed further since then, And even simply comparing how much of a step up over live-action TV production we can see on other shows refutes that. I'm not a big corporate defender, but on the artist and technical side of things, no matter how much money you have to throw at a problem, 9 people can't make a baby in 1 month. Maybe these kinds of trade-offs will be less necessary in the future, but you have to walk before you can run, and it's not something that really impacts the narrative. This is actually just a variation on what we've heard before about Ahsoka during her first appearance in The Mandalorian Season 2. When she was first shown, there were many people displeased with how short her montrals were, montrals being the Togruta's hair-like appendages. After all, we'd seen her in the cartoon with longer ones, so we knew what Ahsoka was supposed to look like, and Shakti had also been in live action with longer ones, so what's the difference? The showrunners then pointed out at the time, basically the equivalent of what I've been saying about Duros here for the facial structure and mouth position. Sure, you can have the longer ones, but if Ahsoka is going to be your main character, she needs to be capable of doing a lot more while wearing those practical effects than Shakti ever had to do in the movies. By making that simple change, while there was some disappointment from some fans, the amount that they can accomplish with a character on the same budget, both in money and production time, is much higher, and it may not have been as feasible to have Ahsoka get her own show without doing it that way. That's just my thoughts on it though. In either case, I hope you've enjoyed the video and are looking forward to the Book of Boba Fett finale this week. On Thursday, Eckhart Slatter and I will be doing our Top Calf Transmissions wrap-up of the episode, and I'm sure there will be a few topics from it that I want to make a similar video to this on, but let me know what you think in the comments. I'll be trying to keep the first few days as spoiler-free as I can in titles and thumbnails after the fact, and for those of you for whom these 5 days weren't enough for the Cad Bane title and thumbnail, I do apologize. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.